U.S. Navy SEAL training, U.S. Army Ranger School, reconnaissance operations, urban warfare, land warfare, advanced marksmanship, advanced diving operations, close quarters combat. All training that culminated over 21 years to form an overcome mindset, leadership, teamwork, maturity, growth, communication, decision-making, mission planning, crisis management, success through change, and balance. Peacetime and combat deployments to South America, Afghanistan, Iraq. 2 gunshot wounds to the left arm, 1 gunshot wound to the face, 37 surgeries, 6 blood transfusions, tracheotomy worn for 7 months and 2 days, 1,500 stitches, 200 staples, 5 plates, 1 titanium orbital floor, 15 screws, 8 pins, 20 skin grafts, 3 bone grafts, 1 Calvarian bone graft. Jaw shattered, broken, and rebroken 3 times. Jaw wired shut, 12 weeks. 50 pounds lost, 190 hours in surgery under anesthesia. Despite all that I have been through, it made me realize some critical things about life. I realized the mark of any man or organization is not found in their past, but how they overcome adversity and build their future. And regardless of the overwhelming odds or opposition in your path, you always have the opportunity to overcome. It is your attitude that will affect the outcome. Quitting is never an option. From the battlefield to your business, lessons forged in fire, taught and applied for company success. Soft spoken, forged by fire, excellence through adversity.
The U.S. Army Ranger, retired Navy SEAL, shot 8 times in the face only 2 weeks before he was scheduled to return home from Iraq.
Now heroes, and tonight the story of one Navy SEAL who refused to give up.
Jason Redman was shot 8 times in an Al-Qaeda ambush in 2007.
Jason posted a bright orange sign on the door of his hospital room. It read,
If you're coming into this room with sorrow or to feel sorry for my wounds, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got in a job I love, doing it for people I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love.
And like thousands of others recovering in hospitals around the country, Jay struggled to find clothing that would fit over all of his medical devices. That's when the light bulb went on, and he found it wounded wear.
Nadine Redman's new mission back here in the States is to inspire civilians with his incredible story of survival.
He's the author of the book, The Trident.
And he's hoping to inspire others to overcome adversity.
I was told by several doctors I'd never bend my arm again, so never quit trying.
Jay works tirelessly to help heal the wounds of war.
Now that I've retired from the Navy, I have 2 new missions: to honor and support my fellow warriors and families of the fallen.
But he believes it's ultimately up to the American people to show these men and women their sacrifices are worth it.
What have you done for your country lately?
And to motivate and inspire my fellow Americans.
And today our police officers hung on his every word about overcoming adversity with teamwork.
Jason, thanks for being here, and thanks for your service to this country.
It's an amazing event. We purposely make it a festival atmosphere because what we're celebrating out here is life. It's the mindset of living greatly. Despite injury, despite loss, despite adversity, you can get out there and live greatly. And you can show the American people that you can get out there and you can overcome anything.
Hello, everybody, and I want to welcome you to the Automotive Recyclers channel. And today we are starting our first of a 4-part series on overcoming ambushes in business and in life. I have the privilege of introducing to you today, or maybe for some of you reintroducing, retired Navy SEAL, motivational and leadership speaker, New York Times bestselling author, Jason Redman. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Vince, honored to be back with you guys. I hope all of you are doing well. It is just, it's been crazy times lately. Just the old 1-2 punches coming.
Yeah. So, Jason, when we watched that opening video with the countdown that we had leading up to this, you watched that. I mean, what just comes over you as you watch that?
A lot of memories. I mean, life is a journey. And I often talk about, I'm actually developing some new programs about how critical it is to be a point man for your own life, how we identify a destination and we have to have a compass to get where we're going. But so often it takes these turns. I mean, obviously my military career did not end in the manner that I thought it was going to, but I set a new path. I set a new destination. I ran a nonprofit for 10 years and I made a decision that it was time to phase that down, lend my support in other places. So constantly we're driving forward. And that's what leadership is. Leadership is identifying a destination and setting that course.
Right. Good. Now you've written a second book, right? First one was Trident, and your new book is called Overcome. And in it, you talk about how to crush adversity. So, right now, we've got hundreds of thousands of small business owners finding themselves in the situation that they didn't anticipate, facing overwhelming odds in a rapidly changing environment, which in many cases threatens their very existence. So does that sound familiar?
Hey, I'm right there with you. I'm one of those small business owners. I mean, my primary revenue source for our business model was me speaking on stages, and 90% of our revenue dried up within about a 2-week period. So I feel all of your pain, but thankfully I'm applying the principles that I teach and the principles that I've learned to drive forward and make a difference in my own life and the lives of people around me.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a very interesting time, and for someone like you who's out there encouraging and talking to people and teaching and leading people how to overcome, you've now found yourself in a spot where you're absolutely having to apply everything, right?
That's right.
Actually.
Yeah, again. Except this is a little different. This is in business as opposed to military or other aspects of my life. This isn't physical. It is a little bit more a combination of 3 things: mental, emotional, and financial. And those can be equally as painful. The enemy of the mind and the enemy of our emotions is very dangerous. There's a lot of people that you can get sucked down these holes where, we buy into common things that I've heard from a lot of people is frequently I'm hearing, oh my God, there's no hope. There's nothing I can do. It's totally outside of my control. Those are these common themes that I'm hearing. And interestingly enough, I can tell you there are individuals and everything in my life, I like to relate it back to these different military principles, because the reason being they work. But if we can make them relatable to the civilian world, they'll work for you too. And that's really what my new book, Overcome, is all about. How do we take military principles, these overcome mindset, leadership techniques, how we build teams, and apply them? So right now, I'll tell you, for the long term, when I look at that, I know the event industry isn't going to open up overnight. I know, we're looking at it. I'm excited to be able to come to Reno at the end of the year and be with you guys. But that probably will be the soonest that the event industry opens up. And I'm really, my company, we were looking at the beginning of January of 2021, really before that starts to pick up speed. So what do we do too then? Well, in the military, it's oftentimes we establish a position and we may hit a stall point. And what do we want to do there? Well, we want to hold our ground. We fought for this ground. We fought for this position. You guys fought for your companies to build what you have. So oftentimes we have to hold our ground. We may not be making forward progress, but at least not outwardly. I'm not bringing in a ton of revenue right now, and maybe not you guys are also. But how do we change that? How do we set ourselves up for that longer term? We want to hold the ground we've gained right now. That way we know when we continue to advance later, we've built that. And those are some of the critical things I talk in my book. And I know for those of you that heard me speak last year, I talked about being on the X. And being on the X is a military term for it is the point of incident, it is the point of attack, it is the point of adversity where most people get bogged down. They get stuck. They're overwhelmed by the stress and the anxiety and the implications of whatever has happened within your life. And there's a natural tendency to allow those things. Remember, I talked about those three critical components in business: financial, mental, and emotional. Those things coming together, and we just feel so overwhelmed that we're like, oh my God, there's nothing I can do. And we have this natural tendency when we're on the X to be looking back at the past. You know, oh, I want the world back the way it was before. I want, you know, our normal pipelines that existed, our normal clients that existed, you know, the pre-COVID world and all those things. But the problem is you can't change that. We can't go back and change the past. All we can do is focus on what's in front of us, what's around us, and how we can move forward into the future. And that is this whole idea, this whole mindset of getting off the X and then starting to control what we can. That's what I'm focused on in my business. What can I control? Well, those virtual events I can do. And there's also, I'm starting to develop new programs that both can be done virtually or they can be done one-on-one, or for the future, they can be consulting programs that I come into a company and help them grow and build for the future.
Right. No, that's outstanding. You know, in your book, Overcome, you talk about these, the ambushes, obviously your experience in the military. But what would you say to people who would say to you, look, Jason, I don't know what it's like to get shot at, but how do you know what it's like to have a business ambush? I mean, and I know that there's a story in your book about making a documentary that answers that, right?
That's right. I encountered a pretty big business ambush back in 2015. Launched on a great project. It was a documentary to honor some of our Gold Star family members. And I got involved with a ex-military guy that I knew and a friend of mine who was a big supporter of the organization. And we went down the path. It looked like it was going to be a great project, did all the fundraising. And to make a long story short, it evolved into a pretty ugly lawsuit. With differences in opinion and egos and personalities all playing a part in where this would go. And I got accused of things that we did not do. And I'll be honest, the guy that made those accusations submitted them to the newspaper. And it was front page news of the accusation. I was accused of fraud and collusion. I mean, I'm very transparent. I'll tell you where it was at. We did not do those things. We were able to, and we had great accounting, and we were able to prove, hey, this didn't happen. Here's all the paperwork disproves your allegations. But it was a massive impact on our company. We had sponsors that pulled out. We had, unfortunately, when people see bad news, they have a tendency to accept it as reality, regardless if it is or isn't. So for us, I literally felt like when all this was occurring that I was back on the X. I felt like I was back in that firefight in Iraq. I felt like literally I was taking rounds and explosions around me, no different than when I was on the battlefield in Iraq. I literally just felt this massive amount of pressure and stress and overwhelming and pain. I mean, it was mentally and emotionally painful to be accused of something that I didn't do that was creating this massive impact on my company and my family.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it just, when I was reading, you said in your book, you said, although there were no bullets, I felt the pain and devastation exactly the same. That was mind blowing to read that and imagine what you went through on the battlefield and then to actually feel that way in a business ambush.
Because they're the same. I mean, that's the reality. And I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, you were a SEAL and, you were shot up. It's not the same. I felt exactly the same in that business ambush. And I'll be honest, to a lesser extent, I feel it right now. But I don't equate, this is not as impactful to me, in my opinion, as what I went through there. I'm navigating this, utilizing the tools, and everybody else out there can do exactly the same. But the feelings and the emotional impact can be the same. So this is where we have to use these tools. This is where it's so critical to get off that X. Here's the thing. Human physiology does not change. We are basically created, and we all have the same hormones. We all have the same reactions to stress. And you've all heard the term fight or flight. So your body does not say, oh, I'm being shot at, or I'm having a business ambush. Your body only says, I'm experiencing massive stress and emotional, physical, or mental pain and anguish. So that's what drives it in that fight or flight mode. So whether it's the actual bullets and bombs on a battlefield or the bullets and bombs in a business, your body is going to react the same. That's why it's critical that you have to apply these tools, because when we're in the moment, it's tough to try and navigate your way out of a problem without having tools to do it.
Was this the first time that you began to realize that the training you received and the experience you had on the battlefield would actually come into play in a business world?
I'll be honest, when that ambush occurred, that was in 2015. So I was starting to figure some of that stuff out, but it hadn't fully come into focus yet. I'll be honest, when it fully came into focus was a couple of years later. I was teaching a leadership program for wounded warriors. And one of the wounded warriors I was working with was a Navy medic assigned to a Marine Corps unit overseas. And they were in a devastating vehicle IED ambush. And they were in armored vehicles. The vehicle in front of his was hit by an IED, lifted the vehicle up, came down. It's smoking. It's on fire. He got out of his vehicle and he ran up to the driver's side door and tried to open the door to try and get this young Marine out. Inside of the vehicle is on fire. The blast had twisted the frame of the vehicle so that the doors, these heavy armored doors, could not be opened. And unfortunately, this young medic watched this young Marine burn to death. And he was devastated. He came home and he checked out of life. For 10 years, this was right at the very beginning of the war, and for 10 years, he just didn't really go out. He stopped living. And when he told me that, it hit me in the face like, oh my God, like, you literally chained yourself to the X of that incident, that ambush that occurred in Iraq, and you've been stuck on it ever since. And it was just this epiphany moment that I realized everybody in life gets stuck on the X. We have these incidents that, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we focus so much on the incident of what happened, and we dwell on it, and we have a tendency to ruminate if we're not careful. And it just, the longer you sit on the X, it's like quicksand. The more it pulls you down and the harder it is to get up. That's why building this mindset of an immediate action drill and having tools to drive forward and get off the X are one of the most critical things you can do to drive forward faster.
Yeah, and I want to share with those watching what you learned and what you teach about the importance to recognize the X and get off the X, and how being on the X can be paralyzing. So I'd like you to kind of unpack like step one when an ambush hits.
Yeah. So within the military, and specifically in the SEAL teams, we have things we call immediate action drills. And immediate action drills are things that we train to do so that if bad things happen, we have already given it some time and thought. What I did is I created something called the REACT methodology, which is basically an immediate action drill that you can use for your life. And I highly encourage you guys to add this into your vocabulary and just start thinking about it. In order to get off the X, if I'm in a life ambush, I've got to react. And REACT is this acronym. The very first step, the R, stands for I've got to recognize. It's the first step. You've got to recognize you're in an ambush. You've got to recognize there's a problem. There's a natural tendency as humans, I'm guilty too, of when we have a problem to kind of dismiss it, like, oh, maybe it's not that big a deal, or maybe it'll go away by itself. or, I don't really want to deal with that. Whatever it is, we have a tendency to be a little bit in denial at the beginning of these problems. But the faster you recognize it is a problem, the faster you can start to deal with it. E stands for evaluate your assets. Evaluate your assets and inventory. So one of the biggest things that makes us feel that way, the things I talked about in the beginning, there's no hope, it's beyond my control, there's nothing I can do, is we usually, when there are majorly big problems, those problems are massively overwhelming. And there's a natural tendency to focus on the problem, to focus on being on the X, instead of taking a breath and figuring out, what do I have to bring to bear to the problem? So evaluate your assets and inventory is taking a step back. It's getting your team and your people involved, maybe your family, depending on what the ambush is, and identifying, okay, what are the tools that we have to bring to bear? If you take it to the firefight that I was in, it was thinking about I had my teammates in another building. I had air assets overhead. I had a quick reaction force. All these things were items we had to bring to bear to the problem. And when I started thinking about those things and talking to my team leader, it gave me a little bit of hope. If you take it back to the business ambush I was in, I thought about the fact we had one of the best law attorney's office in all of Virginia that represented us. And they offered their services to us pro bono. They were our nonprofit attorney. So I immediately reached out to them. They were an incredible asset, and they immediately gave me a little bit of hope. So you got to identify what these things are, the tools in your toolbox that you can bring to bear to the problem. Because when you know you have a tool to use, I mean, you guys work in the mechanical industry, nothing's more frustrating than having a major problem and thinking, oh my God, I don't have a tool. Right. I did a little bit of work on my van, years ago, and there was a specific tool, and I didn't have that tool. And it was so frustrating because this one tool was designed just for this one thing I needed to do, and I didn't have one. I was trying to figure out all these ways to try and do it. It just adds this level of stress. But if you immediately know, oh, I have this one tool that's going to help fix this problem, it drops our level of stress.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was going to ask you a question.
Sure, go ahead.
About the X and specific, for the business community. So how would you advise somebody, like, what is the difference between being in an ambush, and how do you tell the difference between being in an ambush and perhaps just being in a season where you kind of need to just hunker down and weather it out?
So most of the time I define an ambush as something. Ambushes come in two forms. They come in the ones that we see, but we procrastinated dealing with. And then there are the unexpected ones. Obviously, COVID-19 was a totally unexpected ambush. Oftentimes, I see individuals in business and in life who have ambushes come along that we have things called indicators. In military verbiage, we talk about indicators as being something, if I go into an area that we call it channelized, there are buildings on both sides or there's high ground on both sides, meaning there are positions that enemy forces could be up there and shoot down on us. We call this a position of tactical advantage. Those are indicators for me as a leader to say, this probably isn't a good place, or we need to have our guard up. Business is no different. If we have the indicators within our business, if revenues are going down, if our sales are going down, if we're losing customers right and left, these are indicators that there is a problem. And this is where we need to get ahead of it. If you go to the doctor and he says, hey, Vince, I got bad news, man. Like, your cholesterol's up, your blood pressure is through the roof. And oh, by the way, you have a family history of heart attack. These are indicators that you need to make some changes in your life, or you're setting yourself up for a heart attack. If you suddenly have a heart attack and you go, oh my God, I never saw this coming. Yeah, you did. There were all the indicators.
Paying attention. Yeah, you weren't paying attention.
So this is one of the biggest things, identifying the indicators that can help you. Understanding whether it's a single impact ambush typically has to do with the level of impact. If it leaves physical, mental, emotional, or major financial scars on you, meaning you can't just fix it, you can't weather it over time, typically that is an ambush, and you'll remember it for the rest of your life. I've been through 3 major ambushes in my life: leadership failure, my injuries on the battlefield, and that lawsuit that I went through. Those are the 3 that I've been through. I know a lot of people have said to me, this is a life ambush. And for many of you, it absolutely is. For me, I look at this more as a long-term schedule disruption. And that's a little bit of the difference. And there is a reason for that. I have a business. My business, thankfully, has very low overhead. I have my retirement income to supplement. My bills are paid. So this doesn't have the financial impact that it would have on other people just because of things. So for me, this is a schedule disruption.
Yeah. So good point. The exact same incident, COVID-19, for some people was an absolute ambush, and unfortunately may have even put them out of business. Total life disruption. And then for other people, it's a season that you hunker down and you weather out, right? So how that event impacts you or your business or yourself personally really determines the outcome on whether or not this is an ambush, you're on the axe, you need to begin to look around and move off, or you need to hunker down and weather it out, right?
Absolutely. And you can't, and don't compare yourself to others out there. This is one of the big things. It's normal. You know, you may see somebody else in this industry that's doing great, and you're like, why am I not doing great? And then you start to spin down. You got to focus on, okay, once again, what can I control? This is where that react methodology comes in. How do we get off that X? You know, what are the tools we can bring to bear? What are our options and outcomes? How do we communicate and choose the direction we're going to go? And then how do we take action? The worst thing you can do in an ambush or even in a schedule disruption is to do nothing. You can't just sit there and do nothing. You must, back to what we were talking about in the beginning, you must control what you can. And sometimes the ability to control what we can is it's much smaller than what we expect. We think there's these massive big gains that we have to make, but sometimes when there's a massive schedule disruption or even an ambush, there are little tiny steps that we have to take, but that is driving us forward. Perfect example. That night that I was laying on the battlefield, I realized I was totally pinned down by the enemy. I was out of the fight. We have a term called combat ineffective. I was combat ineffective at that point. I was lending nothing to my teammates. Because I'm all shot up, I was grievously injured, and I was pinned down. There was literally machine gun fire traveling over me, so I wasn't able to get up and get back into the fight. Not that I was in a physical ability to do that. I realized that my team leader had taken over. He was coordinating the firefight. He was coordinating everything that needed to happen. He was taking care of things. I started to look at, okay, what are the things that I can control? And really, I realized the only thing that I could control was trying to stay alive and focusing on that. If you look at that with business, in some ways I look at that with my business. I look at, cash flow analysis over this long term. If I know that I'm probably not going to recover that 90% of revenue that I lost at the beginning of the year, how do I manage my cash flow to reduce things down to the level to keep my business alive? I mean, these things are very similar. And on the battlefield, I did the same thing. Okay, I'm not going to be running around. I got to get a tourniquet on. I got to focus on staying awake to stay alive. Here's the other thing you can do. Choose positivity in the face of negativity. This is some of the most negative times I've seen right now in our country, and it's tough, all of us. How do you choose that positivity? Well, you control what's coming in. I'd make a big recommendation: turn off the news. Nothing but negativity there. If you got negative people in your life, I would cut them out also. I'd stay away from social media for a while. It's depressing, to put it perfectly honest. So you control the input, and that's one of the biggest things. And then you choose positivity in the face of negativity. That sign I hung on my door is a shining example of that moment, because I was being inundated with negativity. I had doctors telling me, we're going to amputate your arm. I had doctors telling me, you're never going to be operational again. You're probably going to be put out of the military. And some of those things turned out to be true. I was never operational again, but I did stay in the military. I did, thankfully, with the help of a great doctor, keep my arm. But the biggest thing I did is I said, no, I'm not going to be sucked into this negative hole that all of you guys are placing on me. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. And in that moment, I chose to be positive, and I wrote that sign that said, "Attention to all who enter here. If you're coming in this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds that I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people I love, defending the freedom of a country I deeply love. I will make a full recovery." What is full? That's the absolute utmost physically. I have the ability to recover. Then I'm going to push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense rapid regrowth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere. And we signed it, the management. So here's an interesting thing that I want to challenge all of you to, because we're doing it in our business right now. We're holding our ground. I was holding my ground in that hospital room when I made that sign. I said, this is the bar. This is what I'm going to stand by. It's going to be positivity, not negativity. I challenge you to do that in your own business. Right now, we are looking at the long, we have time. So we're looking at the long-term structure. What are our core values? What is the future of our business? We're really digging into that for us. And I'd highly encourage you to do it, because that sign, where you want to go with your business, the culture of your business, that is choosing positivity in the face of negativity. Every storm has an end. This storm will end. And are you going to be ready for it? Are you just going to survive? And are you going to sit there and basically wither on the X and just hope and pray that you make it out the other side? And I don't know, you look like Gollum when it ends? Or are you prepared and you chose positivity, you held your ground, and you figured out, hey, this is how we're going to come out of this stronger, by setting new goals, by understanding the world's going to be different, by embracing new technology, by identifying new core values, by looking at the resources, the tools we have. For us, we looked at PPP and we looked at EIDL, and thankfully, we got approved for those things. So I'm looking at, okay, cool. How do we hire and grow our business for the future? Maybe right now it's not the time because we're not there yet, but we're going to put the structure in place so we're ready to go when the big economic machine starts to turn back on.
Yeah. Now you talk about, quickly identifying where you are on the X, moving away from it as quickly as possible, choosing positivity. You also talk about in your book the danger of looking around and trying to put the blame on somebody else, right? How long did you spend trying to blame somebody when you were pinned down? Probably zero, right?
Myself, I did kick myself for a minute saying, man, how did you get yourself into this situation? But interestingly enough, and Vince, that's a great point. So many companies and individuals waste a ton of time on the X. As a matter of fact, oftentimes it becomes our very first reaction. How did we get here and who's to blame? And we waste a lot of time trying to figure that out. I'm going to tell you something right now. It doesn't matter in the moment. You're already there. It is so much wasted time and so much wasted energy, specifically emotional energy, trying to figure out why or who's to blame in the moment of a crisis. None of that matters in the moment. All that matters in the moment is getting off that X and driving forward. Now, once you get out of that initial point and things are stable, at that point, I do think it's always a good idea to do an after action and kind of look back and say, what got us in that? What could we do different?
You don't want to end up there again.
Exactly. A perfect example within the SEAL teams, even though we did what we had been trained to do in that situation, that my team and I got shot up, but we changed the SEAL teams changed their tactics after that. We decided this was not what we were doing led to this problem. So they changed it. And we have to do that in our business also. But don't kick yourself over it, and don't waste that time trying to blame someone for being there.
Right. So you talk about surviving, right? Identify, move off the X. And I want to talk for a little bit about the next step. And then I want to let everybody know who's watching that we're going to allow for a few minutes for some questions. So if you have questions for Jason, get ready. So the next step in your book, you talk about the breacher, right? Tell us about who the breacher is on the SEAL team and how that factors into a business world or even your personal ambush.
Yeah, so breachers are individuals in the military, law enforcement. They are trained to get inside block structures, if you will. The number one thing we use breachers for is to go through doors. So if we are coming up on a target building that there's an enemy inside, if the door is locked, then a breacher is trained to come up and unlock or breach that door. And they learn all kinds of different skills. They learn what we call manual skills. So they learn how to pick locks. They learn how to take sledgehammers and knock doors in. They learn how to use something called a hooligan tool to pry a door open, bolt cutters to cut through, steel wire, things like that. Then they learn mechanical tools. They learn how to use quickie saws and chainsaws and exothermic torches. And then they learn explosives. They learn how to be surgeons with explosives, how to blow through thick levels of concrete. And they also learn how to be surgical with explosives, how, depending on if we have a hostage rescue situation, we have to be very careful with explosives because we may kill someone inside the room. So they understand how to find these balances, how to take blast to push them down into a floor so it doesn't send fragmentation back in the room. All those things are amazing skills. It is the mindset we teach these guys that truly makes the difference. And it is the mindset that I encourage all of you have to develop a breacher mindset when it comes to problems out there. We teach them that there is no door or wall or obstacle they cannot get through. And oftentimes people think that we are one-dimensional in our thinking. We come up against a problem and we think, man, we just got to get through it. And we bash our heads against this problem over and over again. A lot of people in business and in life live the definition of insanity when it comes to dealing with massive adversity. We do the same thing over again, expecting a different result. But we tell our breachers is, hey, man, even though we've taught you all these incredible ways to get through doors, it doesn't matter how you get through. We don't care. All that matters is you figure out a way to the other side, whether you go over it, under it, around it, or if you have to go directly through it, then that's the way. And that's really an interesting thing because I have come to learn in my life, sometimes when I'm dealing with a massive problem, with massive adversity, we put all this stress and pressure on ourselves and that builds up. And when we're grinding against that problem, sometimes it's hard to see the bigger picture. But if you're smart and leaders and good teams, they'll say, you know what, we need to relieve the pressure for a minute. Let's take the pressure off and let's take a step back. And all of a sudden, when that stress relieves, you get to take a break, you get to look around. And as you're looking, you're like, holy smokes, did you see there's a window open on that wall over there to the right? Let's just go through that window. Yeah. That is the breacher mindset. It is over it, under it, around it, or through it. But don't push and grind so hard doing the same thing. Be smart, take that time, step back, and you may see alternate ways to get through. But no matter what, we always keep going and figuring out a way to the other side. You may have to, if there's a massive wall in your path, you may have to walk miles and miles and miles till you finally find a break in that wall. But instead of trying to bash your head through it or climb over it, which may be impossible, you just may have to go a longer journey to figure out how to get to the other side. But at the end of the day, as long as you make it to the other side, that's what it's about.
The adversity or the obstacle, that becomes your opportunity.
Absolutely. And you learn from it.
Right.
Instead of damaging yourself or putting yourself on another X, just grinding away, trying to get through it when there may be a smarter way.
Yeah. And a lot of people are looking at their business and the way they've done things for years may not be the way they do things going forward. Right.
You're absolutely right. We have to, I teach something, and we'll talk about this in later lessons. Some of you heard me touch upon it, the Pentagon of Peak Performance. It's 5 key areas that you have to lead yourself to be balanced. The second level is mental leadership. And one of the things I talk about in mental leadership is challenge your beliefs. Just because you've done something one way for so many years and it worked doesn't mean it's still the right way. You've got to constantly challenge your beliefs. The world changes. Right now, the world's changing. Technology is booming. New technologies. Sometimes I do think that this COVID crisis will fundamentally change the way business is done for the future of America. Absolutely. I am very interested to see what the event industry looks like once all this goes away. I don't think it'll fully go back to the way it was before.
No, it'll be interesting to see. And you talk about when you're working the problem, when you're trying to get over or around or through the obstacle, sometimes just accepting what's going on, it's different from surrendering, right? Acceptance is not surrender.
That's right. So surrendering is quitting, saying, I'm just not going to do this. This doesn't work. Accepting sometimes, and this is a harder thing for people to wrap their head around, because oftentimes when we've identified a goal, we will only accept that goal as the outcome. But sometimes the world changes and that goal is no longer attainable. It was my goal in the military to retire with 30 years and someday be a commanding officer. I even had aspirations of being an admiral someday. When I was wounded and non-operational anymore, that goal was unattainable. I could not be SEALs are built on an operational pipeline. And if I was non-operational, there was no way, there was nothing I could do because I couldn't check those operational leadership blocks that I needed. So the outcome changed. And this is where sometimes we have to accept that the outcome may not be what we originally planned on. But that's where we got to take that step back. We got to reevaluate and we got to decide, oh, you know what? The reality is the original destination we set, it's unattainable.
Yeah.
So now,
well, even on that day, your original destination, your original goal and mission, that changed in a second.
Absolutely. What went from a capture elimination mission turned into a rescue mission.
Yeah.
So like that. And usually it doesn't happen that quickly in life and in business, but sometimes, we really have to take a step back and say, hey, this outcome that we thought was going to happen can't happen now. So how do we pivot? How do we turn? How do we set a new destination and lay out that path?
Yeah. So look, if anybody has any questions, I want you to fire them away because we're gonna wrap this up. I just want to summarize our first session. We've got 3 more sessions. Then Jason's going to be joining us in November in Reno as our keynote speaker. Today we've talked about the first step in overcoming is identifying that you're on the X. You have to survive the X. In order to survive the X, you got to move off the X, right? And that's what you talked about. And as we kind of wrap this up, I want you to kind of circle back and hit that react one more time as we're seeing if anybody's got any questions, and we're wrapping this up.
Yeah, guys. So the react methodology, it is something to plant in your head. 2 things. When you encounter a big crisis, even a minor crisis, it'll work. You got, number 1, plant that phrase in your mind. I got to get off the X. I don't know I can't tell you how often I tell myself, man, I got to get off the X all the time. Sometimes it's just that little voice in the back of my head that says, you can't do this. And I tell myself, get off the X, let's go. And then using that react methodology. Number 1, recognize there's a crisis. Number 2, evaluate your assets and inventory that you have to bring to bear to the problem. Number 3, assess possible options and outcomes and look long-term. Don't just pick the easiest route, because sometimes that easiest route doesn't lend itself to the better long-term outcome. Number 4, choose and communicate to the people around you where you're going to go. And number 5, most critical, take action. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Faster you get off the X, the better it's going to be.
Outstanding. Well, Jason, I want to thank you. I'm looking forward to, as we move forward over the next few months, unpacking and taking a deeper dive. But I just want to thank you for your time. And certainly I want to thank you for your service. And I'm looking forward to talking with you in the future and seeing you in Reno. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Vince, my honor. And to all of you out there, hey, keep positivity. Choose positivity over negativity. You got this.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.